Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. The subject of control decks in Hearthstone has been ever present for the past several months now, because there are not a lot of control decks around, you may have noticed. The overall discussion is interesting to say the least. There are lots of attempts to redefine what control means so that, yeah, sure, there are control decks. This is a control deck. And there's general disagreement now on what control even means in Hearthstone. And recently, Gallon, one of the game designers, was interviewed by Vicious Syndicate. This is from a Reddit thread that was a recap of the interview. It was in a podcast, but this captures the gist of what was said quite well. So, there's no additional lethality in a lot of classes. Is this designed on purpose to prevent games from going to a certain length, or is this something we can expect changes to going forward? This is an intentional design choice to have a soft cap on game lengths. Games going to fatigue should still be a possibility in Hearthstone, and fatigue decks potentially being a small part of the metagame is cool. Issues start to arise when fatigue becomes a normal experience. Elysiana Control Warrior and Baron's Priest are examples of where fatigue-like decks had a negative gameplay experience. I might have a word or two to say about that, because what the gameplay experience is against Elysiana Control Warrior and Baron's Priest is completely different. Elysiana Control Warrior is a deck where you carefully manage your resources to run your opponent out of stuff, attrition-based strategy. Whereas Baron's Priest was a deck full of random generation where the outcome was completely unexpected and there was no way to play around anything, and it was just Hearthstone. So the negative gameplay experience of being outmatched by a more skilled player or being outmatched by randomness, there's maybe a little bit of difference there, but whatever. However, then the next part, Volner Shaman and Galvanga Warrior are examples of late game lethality in control decks, and we don't consider them combo decks. To be specific, Gallon said we don't consider them combo decks too much, and that too much is kind of relevant because if he had just said this, then he would be sorely mistaken and would just not understand card games at all. But not considering them combo decks too much, okay, I can see where that is coming from. But there is still a bit of redefining of what control deck means to come to even this conclusion. Let me explain. In these types of card games since Magic the Gathering, there are traditionally 4 archetypes. There's aggro. Aggro is just in your face, trying to reduce your life total as fast as possible. There's midrange. Midrange includes some control-less elements, so it can fight against aggro by defending a little bit, but then maybe turn 4, turn 5, it starts to just get some threats going and starts to pressure you. It tries to go under the control decks, and it tries to play the control role against aggro decks. Then there is control, and traditional control has basically 2 different win conditions. One is attrition, like full attrition. You literally run your opponent out of resources, so they cannot do anything anymore and you win. And the other option is late game value, so you control what your opponent's able to do, you prevent them from doing stuff, and then in the late game you play some big threats, really big threats. And these threats eventually will win you the game because the opponent doesn't have resources left to answer them. And the 4th archetype is combo. This is where you assemble a win condition from 2 or more cards, and it just wins you the game. Typically combo decks just try to draw really quickly, be very consistent, assemble their combo, and boom, off they go, win the game. However, all these categorizations are of course artificial. Like, typically we try to categorize things as human beings, we try to put them in neat boxes, but reality is more complex than that. And in order to try to capture that reality, for example in Magic the Gathering, there have been these sorts of hybrid archetypes. Talk of hybrid archetypes. One of hybrid archetypes is Control Combo. Control Combo is sort of like a combo deck, it has the combo finisher, but it's also sort of like a control deck, because it doesn't try to race to its win condition, but instead it tries to control what the opponent is doing and then slowly over time eventually assemble its win condition and boom, just win the game. And we have those decks in Hearthstone right now. Volner OTK Shaman is a deck like that. Galvangar Warrior, Charge Warrior is a deck like that. They are both control combo decks. So in a way, yes, they are control decks, and yes, they are combo decks, but really, the more accurate description of them is to call them these sorts of hybrid decks. And there are more hybrids than that. For example, there's aggro control. Aggro control is where you have an aggressive strategy, you try to reduce your opponent's life total pretty quickly, but you also have a lot of permissive elements in the deck, so you're trying to prevent your opponent from doing things effectively. In Hearthstone, typically aggro control, you could call it a tempo deck. Typically in Hearthstone, Rogue has been the only class pretty much that exhibits these aggro control elements, because Rogue has access to cards like Sap, for example. So you can very effectively deny some things from your opponent while developing your aggressive strategy. And then there's also aggro combo. So aggro combo is like you're going very aggressively in the early game, but then you also have a combo finisher. And in the current Hearthstone meta, Burn Shaman exhibits these features. Burn Shaman has minions that it can use to put in chip damage, and then it can finish off with spells. But it can also finish off entirely with spells. It can play a full combo role. But typically it wants to do this chip damage first instead of doing like a traditional combo deck, which just assemble the combo and then win. So there is more to archetypes than just these four, because there are all these hybrid strategies as well, but that doesn't mean that we don't know what the four main archetypes in their purest forms are. And it most definitely doesn't mean that a player who enjoys traditional control would necessarily enjoy control combo. These are the decks that are currently called control decks by some people in Hearthstone. So we have the Bolner OTK Shaman, and that's a really clear control combo deck, because it has lots of control elements, it assembles its combo slowly, and then it wins through its combo. And then we have the Charge Warrior or Galvanger Warrior, and also, like, this is a fun one, because I played Charge Warrior a bunch and you win practically every game with Battleground Battlemaster, Captain Galvanger, Faceless Manipulator to the front. You win with their combo. And there is Rattlegore in this deck, which Rattlegore would be like a traditional control card. Rattlegore is slow, value-based card that a control deck can play, and then control deck will win with that when the opponent cannot answer it. And funnily enough, Rattlegore is by far the weakest card in Charge Warrior, and actually it's probably a card that should not be run in Charge Warrior because it's not really doing anything for the deck. And that kind of goes to show the demise of traditional control. We have one of the best ever traditional control cards in the game at the moment with Rattlegore, and it's totally useless. And then there's Fell Demon Hunter. Some people are also calling Fell Demon Hunter a control deck, but that is clearly a mistake, because Fell Demon Hunter is an archetypal mid-range deck. It has control elements in it, so it's able to fight a defensive fight. But when it faces an actual control deck, it will always try to go under them, because when it faces an actual control deck, then eventually the control deck will win, unless the Fell Demon Hunter is able to close out the game. So all these three decks have been called control decks in Hearthstone, but they're really two control combo decks and one mid-range deck. But what would a Hearthstone control deck look like? Well, Elysiana Control Warrior is a great example. Archivist Elysiana, discover cards, replace your deck with 2 copies of each, just go to fatigue, take the game to attrition, run the opponent out of resources. Funnily enough, we now have an equivalent card with Kazakusan. Kazakusan has the exact same effect as Elysiana. It replaces your deck with 10 new cards. So if there was such a thing as traditional control around, then Kazakusan would definitely be running it. It's superior to Archivist Elysiana. But the overall game design does not allow you to play that kind of decks anymore. Also, we had like Control Warrior back in Vanilla, and back in Vanilla, Control Warrior played stuff like Gromash and Ysera and Cairn, these sorts of big value cards. So you were able to remove what your opponent is doing, then you start jamming these big cards of your own on the board, and the opponent will no longer be able to answer them, and then they will win you the game. They don't win you through combo, they don't just come on the board and the game is over immediately, but the opponent will not be able to answer them, so that's traditional control. So while there is some truth to control decks existing in Hearthstone, because these sorts of control combo decks do exist in Hearthstone at the moment, but the real problem is that these sorts of control combo decks, they are not really satisfying to play for someone who likes to play traditional control. And this traditional control, either in its attrition form or in its win-through value form, cannot exist in the current Hearthstone meta. Then we of course arrive at a more fundamental question, like an ideal meta from my perspective would be one where all archetypes exist, aggro, mid-range, control, combo. But the design of Hearthstone, because there are so few resources for permission, there's so little interactivity, that it's incredibly difficult to have combo decks and control decks exist in the same meta, because they just cannot interact very effectively with each other. Either the control wins or the combo wins. It's very difficult to have both. And the designer's current answer is that, hey, maybe you can play these sorts of control combo decks, then you have a bit more of a chance. And maybe we can make control combo coexist with traditional combo. And then traditional control is just ditched. And that is exactly what has happened. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please click the like button, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Twitch channel.